Hey everybody. I want to take a few quick seconds before getting into tonight's story to let you know I'm going to be doing a live in-person book signing and meet and greet on Wednesday, December 20th, 2023 at the Shady Grove Lucaya Cafe in Hamilton, Ontario. So if you're in Southern Ontario or the Greater Toronto area and want to make a trip to say hello, I hugely appreciate it. I'll be signing copies of my new book, From the Darkness, as well as my other books, and there'll be live music and a story reading. Hope to see a bunch of you there, and now on to tonight's story. There was a running joke in my family for many years. It was always the ladies who said it, never the men, as if the guys were in on some secret the women didn't know about. "There goes the werewolf," my mother and aunts would say, as my grandpa was going out the door, hat in hand. "He always disappears on full moons, never comes back until the morning." As children, we would laugh along with them, not understanding the true reasons for his leaving. The years went on, and my grandfather, who I called my Opa, kept disappearing on full moons until he was no longer able to walk. Soon after that, he was admitted to the hospital and came down with a bad infection, passing away a short while later from a myriad of complications. Strangely, after his death, my dad took up the tradition of disappearing during full moons. He never did it before Opa passed away, but suddenly he started exhibiting the exact same behavior. "I'm heading out," he would say to my mother, putting on his coat and leaving the house right before sunset. "I'll see you in the morning." "Again? You really are turning into your father," my mom would call after him as he hurried down the porch steps, sometimes jogging or running, as if late for an appointment. She didn't realize how right she was. Eventually I moved away and went to college. Found a girlfriend and got engaged, married, bought a house. If you want to sum up my entire life in one sentence, I guess that about does it. Except something happened recently, derailing that one-sentence description of my existence, and turning it into a rambling run-on with no end in sight. My father called, and told me he needed to talk to me about something. He said it was important and couldn't wait. I needed to come over right away. "What is it?" I asked once we were finally alone in his basement man cave. He poured 2 glasses of scotch halfway to the brim, then added a bit more for good measure. He handed me one of the glasses and I took it, eyeing him suspiciously. "I don't drink," I reminded him. "Trust me, you'll want that." He sat down on a leather chair across from me, the fire roaring beside him. I took a tentative sip and winced at the burn, smacking my lips to try and appreciate the taste, then set the glass down on the table beside me. "I've been trying to keep this from you for as long as possible. I have to tell you something important about your Opa." "Opa's been dead for years," I smiled nervously. "You're not losing your memory, are you, Dad?" "My memory's fine. Just listen, okay? Your Opa had a secret, and now it's my secret. And I have to pass it on to you. It's important, okay? Just trust me." "All right," I said nervously and took another sip of the drink. The burn wasn't as bad this time. It was more like a warmth that coated my throat and sizzled in my stomach. "You remember how Opa always disappeared on full moons? Did you ever wonder why he did that? And why I started doing it right after he died?" It had been a while since I'd thought about this. I had just accepted it as part of life at a certain point, like a strange paternal family tradition. I had semi-forgotten about my dad's odd habit of escaping the house on full moons. Looking back at his face, I was surprised by how many new wrinkles had formed around his eyes when I hadn't been paying attention. It occurred to me how often I looked at him without really looking at him. I always thought it was an excuse for you to get out with the guys, go drinking or the strip club or something. Some of my friends tried to convince me you were in a cult, but I told them that was ridiculous. I thought about whether or not I should say my last thought, and it slipped out anyways. A guy at college said you were probably in the mafia. I looked at his somber face and my chest grew tighter. Then he burst out laughing, breaking the tension. I laughed along with him, still feeling that stone of dread in my belly. "I'm not in a cult or the mafia." Okay, well, what is it then? His face turned grave again. He took a sip of his drink. Then he took another. And another. Finally, after several more long moments of silence, he stood up. "Let's go for a walk," he said. "You need to see it to believe it." I followed after him reluctantly. My father took me out to the woods behind his house, which led deep into a forested wilderness that stretched on for a long, long ways. There was no path, but he seemed to know exactly where he was going, as he trudged through the thick grass and brush, leading me deeper and deeper into the woods. "What the hell are we doing out here?" I asked him, slapping at a mosquito which landed on my neck, leaving a pool of blood on my palm. "You'll see," was all he would say. We walked for a long time, mostly without conversation, through the dark forest far away from the path. Finally, we reached my father's intended destination, a little clearing with a few logs situated around a fire pit. It was evening, and sunset was an hour or so away. A full moon was waiting bloated behind the horizon. I glanced over and was alarmed to see a few chains attached to a tree nearby. My eyes traced down the length of them to a set of steel manacles. "Dad, what are those chains for?" I asked, getting scared. He must have heard the fear in my voice and tried to reassure me. "It's okay, son," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. "You know I would never hurt you. In a million years, right?" I nodded. "Good. Now I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust me?" I nodded again, tears welling up in my eyes for reasons I didn't understand. "Listen, we have a bit of time. There's no big rush. That's why I brought you out here early. There's a few things I need to tell you, and some are going to be easier to believe than others, but all of them are true. And when I ask you to do what I need you to do, I need you to not ask any questions. I need you to just do it and trust me, okay?" "I guess. As long as it's not too crazy," I said, trying to keep it together. "Just tell me already, Dad. I'm dying of suspense over here." He motioned for me to sit on one of the logs next to the fire pit. I did so, and he began to build a fire. Despite his age, he could still do it quicker than anyone I'd ever met. I watched him set it alight, and it roared up in an instant inferno. He sat down on a log across the way, and his eyes met mine. My soul felt like it was leaving my body as he spoke his next words. "I'm dying, son. It's the big C." I couldn't even respond. All I could do was sit there with my mouth hanging open, staring across the fire at him. The embers popped and sparks flew into the air between us. "It's in my colon, which means it's everywhere else, too, according to the doctors. They did the tests, gave me a few options. Chemo and radiation will extend my life, probably, but no guarantees. And there would be side effects. Possibly devastating side effects. I saw how that went with your grandmother, and I'm not going to go through that. Which means I'm going to finish things au naturel." I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off before I could say a word. "It's my choice, so don't argue. They're giving me a few months at most, maybe less. I don't know how I'm going to look in a week or a month, so I need to tell you all of this now while I still can. While my mind is still sharp, you understand?" I was in shock, unsure of what to say. It wouldn't sink in for several more days, so at that moment I just stood up and gave him a big hug, squeezing him tight until he made a pained noise. For the first time I noticed how thin he'd gotten lately. My arms used to have trouble making it all the way around his waist, but now I felt his ribs and the lack of a belly. Again, I'd been looking at him, but not really seeing him for a while. "What else did you need to tell me?" I said, after saying all of the other things that you say when someone you love tells you they're dying. It sounded important, whatever it was. "Something about Opa?" He nodded, looking solemn. "Yes, unfortunately that's even harder news. I really don't want to tell you about this.
I have no choice, though. You have to understand that I tried, and there is no way out of this. Like the cancer, it's a part of me. It's a part of us. Just remember, no matter what, that I tried. You don't need to go through that, okay? This is a curse, an irreversible one, that has been passed down to my side of the family and my side alone. Only the men are afflicted with it, never the women. We try to keep it from them so they don't have to live with the guilt and the pain that we do. I prayed for your mother to have a girl. You have to believe me. I prayed you would not be born into this.
What are you talking about, Dad? The cancer? Are you saying that's some sort of family curse? That's crazy. I mean, genetics play a part, I'm sure, but it's not...
No.
He cut me off.
We can die from diseases just like any mortal. The stories are all wrong about that. We are merely men with a terrible curse.
I waited for him to explain in plain English and hoped that eventually he would get around to it. The sun was drawing closer and closer to the horizon, and that felt like an important detail for some reason. Like an hourglass running out of sand. He stood up and pointed to his belt. It was old, and I realized it was the same one my grandfather had worn. There was a silver wolf head which comprised the buckle.
This belt is special, son. It holds an ancient power. It was passed down to me by my father, your Opa, and it was given to him by his father before him, going back for hundreds and hundreds of years. This belt is what gives us our power, but it also carries with it a great curse.
I stared at him, wondering what the hell he could possibly be talking about.
Just listen,
he said, as if reading my mind.
In about half an hour, you won't need to believe my words. You'll see it for yourself. It's a full moon tonight, Jason. And that means I'm going to turn into something else. A thing that's not quite a man, not quite a wolf. Somewhere in between.
What? I nearly screamed. That's insane, Dad. This is all nuts. I thought maybe the cancer was affecting his mind. What other reason could there be for such a bizarre, outrageous lie? Instead of debating with me, he just continued on as if I hadn't spoken. This belt is a symbol of our power, but it is more than that. It carries with it our strength and our curse. If you should ever lose it, it will haunt you. Every death you see on the news will be your burden to bear, for you have forsaken your sworn duty. The dead will come to you in your dreams, and you will never truly rest again. Hear my words, son, and remember them. I sat down on the wooden log, landing hard on my ass and nearly toppling it over. Dad, come on, you're kidding me, right? Is this a joke? He shook his head. I wish it was, son, but it's very real. And I'm going to prove it to you. No, Dad, you don't have to do that, I yelled, but he ignored me. He stood up and walked over to the tree where chains and manacles were attached. I followed after him, running to catch up. Despite his age, he could still move quickly, and the fire he had started was still roaring behind us, and I had no concerns about tending to it to keep it going. It was blazing high, and he had already stacked a pile of wood nearby to feed it, as if planning to stay here for a while. Or maybe, it occurred to me, he was thinking that I would want to stay here for a while with him. I can lock these ones, but I need you to do the last one, my father said, putting the handcuffs around his ankles and wrists. He snapped them shut and locked them with a key. I noticed they hung loosely around his wrists, and he could easily escape them. But maybe, just maybe, a voice in my mind said, he would grow into them. Come on, we're running out of time, he said, and I noticed for the first time that the sun had set, and it would soon be fully dark. It was twilight now, and there was very little light remaining. An orange full moon was cresting large on the horizon. Normally I would argue with him, but I could tell he was serious and would be very upset if I tried. Feeling numb, I went over to the steel bracelet on his left wrist and locked it with the key he handed me. Then I stood back, surveying the strange scene. Mosquitoes were buzzing and landing on my neck, and I slapped at them, wishing I'd brought bug spray. They were landing on my dad, too, but he didn't seem to notice them.
"This is gonna get ugly," he said. "Whatever I do, don't try to help me. Don't try to assist me in any way. It's gonna look like I'm in pain, and I am gonna be in some pain. But it will only last for a short while, and then I'll be myself again."
I opened my mouth to say something and then closed it again. What the hell could I say? "Dad, you don't have to do this," I tried. "Whatever's happening to you, I'm sure it's not..." A noise interrupted my speech, and I realized it was the sound of clothing being torn. It was his shirt. The skin underneath was bulging and growing like a tumorous lump, but then it smoothed out and spread, turning into a growing ripple of muscle. It stretched down the length of his left arm, hairs bristling out from his skin along the way, following the path of its growth. His left arm now fit snugly in the handcuff, which I had assumed was too large for him. He winced and bared his teeth from a sudden pain, letting out a low noise. I reached forward to put my hand on his shoulder.
"Get back!"
he roared, and his voice sounded different now. Lower and thicker, like the growl of a dog. I stumbled backwards, terrified and startled, tripped over a branch. Landing hard on my back, my head whipped into a rock and bounced up and down a couple times, before settling in the dirt. Pain bloomed back there, and I saw stars explode through the darkness of my vision. It's possible I passed out momentarily or for more than a few minutes. When I opened my eyes, all I could think about was the sharp ache at the back of my skull. I reached back to feel the warmth of blood on my hand and held it up to my face to see how bad it was, but it was too dark to tell. I looked down to see my head had collided with a rock which was embedded in the forest floor. The stars were out in the night sky above, but they were not as visible due to the brightness of the full moon and the canopy of swaying tree branches above. Struggling to rise to my feet, I looked to see a creature which appeared to be a werewolf chained to a tree nearby. It stood on its hind legs, flexing and straining against the chains which bound it to the tree. It snapped its teeth and fixed its eyes on me. The dirt at the base of the tree buckled and crunched as if he might lift the whole thing out from the dirt, but the roots held firm, and a second later the creature relaxed slightly, its snout sniffing at the air, smelling my blood on the wind. "Dad?" I whispered, moving closer to it. "Is that really you? Are you still in there?" The creature, standing on two legs, was covered in thick, wiry fur, gray streaked with white, just like my dad's beard. And when I looked into his eyes, I could see something familiar there. A glimmer in them. But then the beast was snapping its jaws and aggressively growling at me, pulling on its chains as it tried to break free once again. It was too much to look at. Too much to bear after the news I had just been given. All of this was too much. It was making me feel sick, lightheaded, just thinking about how much my life had changed in a few short hours. I slowly backed away and went towards the fire, grateful when the sound of growling began to recede, and eventually went away altogether, drowned out by the crackling of the flames and the wind in the trees. The bonfire was guttering, despite my dad's excellent construction of it. I got the feeling I'd been out for a while, judging by the moon and the stars in the sky above. At least it was still going enough that I could coax it back to life. I fed a few more logs onto it and some smaller kindling beneath that, then began to blow on the embers until the dry wood caught alight. Within a few minutes it was roaring again, and I was holding my hands up to the blaze to warm them. They were still shaking, and my teeth were chattering from fear and numb shock, but I was starting to settle down a little bit. My father was a werewolf. It didn't seem real, but there it was. There he was. All I needed to do was look over at him to confirm I wasn't dreaming. This was real. I decided to dig around in my dad's bag to see if he'd brought anything to drink. Sure enough, there were hot dogs and cold soda just waiting for me to find them. Cracking one open, I glanced at my dad, the dog man, out of the corner of my eye. He had settled back against the tree as if resigned to his fate, but I thought I could sense an occasional movement, as if he were still testing his restraints. Something else caught my eye at the bottom of the bag, and I took it out to examine it in the light of the fire. Journal, the cover of the book read. A sticky note was attached to the front, and I pulled it off to read it in the light.
"Hope this helps. Dad.
It was his journal, I realized. And he wanted me to read it. I opened it and began to read from the first page as my father struggled and growled in his chains a little ways away. Still trembling with terror, I held the pages close to the fire and began to read, hoping to learn the secrets of my family's curse. Instead, what I found was a record of my father's life, and a startling picture of what my own grim existence would soon look like.
January 10th, 2001. It finally happened. For years he warned me, and yet I was still not prepared for this. How could anyone hope to be prepared for this? Those people. So many died by my hands. The newspaper called it an animal attack, and that is not so far from the truth. When I am in that form, I am all instinct and anger, completely unable to form rational thoughts. But that does not excuse my lack of preparation. My father told me to prepare, but I used my grief as an excuse to forget. I will go to hell for the things I have done. There is no doubt in my mind about that. Heaven has no place for a man who can tear apart a woman with his bare teeth. Next time I will be more careful. For the next few weeks I will need to devise a plan. I will need to speak to Uncle Horace. He promised to help me, but I do not know how he will manage to do so if he suffers from the same affliction. Still, at the very least, he may be able to give me some advice. Until next time, GH.
I read a few more pages, then realized the fire needed to be fed, and stood up to grab more wood. As soon as I did, I heard a loud growling noise from behind me where my father was chained to the tree. He pulled against the restraints again, and I thought I saw something crack, a piece of the tree splintering and coming loose. But then he settled back again, and I realized it was nothing of consequence, just a piece of bark that had come loose. Or so I thought. After stoking the fire and letting it burn for a while, warming my hands against the heat of the flames, I settled back into reading.
February 9th, 2001. It worked. The chains held fast, and the manacles were large enough to keep my wrists secure without injuring myself. My arms are sore and my shoulders ache, but at least my conscience is clean, knowing I did everything in my power to prevent disaster. Damn this belt. I wish I could get rid of it. I wish I could just throw it in the ocean and let the tide take it away. But Uncle Horace warned me not to. If I do, then someone else will find it. And who knows what they might do with this power if left unchecked. The world would be safer without us in it. GH.
It was sad to think that my father had help, but I would have none. If this condition was really passed on to me, I would be the last one in our family afflicted with it. I had no kids, and I wasn't planning on having any. And my great-uncle Horace and all the other men in my family had passed away. I was the last man in the Hamburg line, aside from my father, and that meant the family's secret would die with me, assuming I could keep it a secret. It also meant that once my father passed away, there would be no one around to help me with this curse. No one to guide me like Uncle Horace had guided him. The journal I was holding was all I had, aside from the advice of my father, and he didn't have much time left by the sounds of it. Something made a loud cracking sound in the forest behind me, and I stood up and turned around. I saw the vague outline of a person, just a smudge of shadow against the trees, and then heard the air whistling behind me as something large and heavy came swinging at my head. I don't remember it hitting me, only the pain I felt afterwards. The fire was in front of me when I blinked my eyes open, but the flames were blurry and ill-defined. My head was spinning and my ears were ringing as I tried to focus on the man in front of me who was speaking. He snapped his fingers once, twice, 3 times, as if trying to get me to pay attention.
There we go, wakey wakey, he said, grinning. Nice job, fellow hunter. Sorry to blindside you like that, but we had to be sure. Rumor has it there's some sick freaks around here. We're friendly with these creatures.
I groaned, trying to form words. Who are you? I looked around to see more men nearby, all dressed in camouflage.
"Hunters," he said. "Dogman hunters."
Shit. I looked over to see where my dad was chained up. There were 2 men taking pictures of him with their cell phones, while he growled and snapped his teeth at them.
"Yo, nowhere near as accomplished as you, though,"
the man's friend said.
"I've seen a few of them, but never caught one and chained it up. Damn, dude, how'd you manage that?"
I tried to think up a lie. My head was still spinning, though, and I was having trouble thinking straight.
"Hey, Dave, check this out,"
one of the guys near my father said, pointing at the belt around his waist. I stood up on shaky legs and wandered over to join the group of them. "Yeah, it's weird. He was wearing that belt when I found him," I muttered, trying to think of what to say on the fly.
"How'd you manage to subdue this beast, brother?"
one of the men asked. He was tall with a long black beard, wearing plaid and a black jacket.
"Almost looks like a prior arrangement to me."
The group of them turned to look at me suspiciously. "A prior arrangement?" I asked. "What's that even mean?" This brought more murmurs from the group, and I heard a few unkind whispers about my true allegiance.
"Where's your gear, brother? Your rifle and all your equipment?"
A louder grumbling began to rise up from the men, as a few of them began to move towards me.
"Is this your journal?"
A voice asked me from behind, reading through it aloud. All of my family's secrets suddenly being spoken out into the world for this whole group of men to hear.
"He's one of them,"
someone said.
"We can't let him go." "He's a lichen."
"A beast."
"From hell."
2 of them grabbed me from behind, while one holding the journal marched over, waving the book in his hand.
"I asked you a question,"
he said, smacking me on the forehead with the leather-bound book.
"Is this yours?"
I stared at him defiantly, the whole time watching my father out of the corner of my eye. He was still pulling at the restraints, testing them, straining against them with all of his might. The tree was bending against his efforts, the trunk splintering and cracking. It was my father's, I spat, looking behind him fully now at the creature chained to the tree. It belongs to my father. There was a grumbling amongst the group members, and then finally one of them spoke up loudly.
"We'll kill them both. Even if he's not one of them yet, he's got it in his blood. It's only a matter of time before he goes through the transformation."
"Grab him. Don't let him get away." I turned to run, but it was too late. They were already on me. One of the men tackled me, pinning me to the ground while another approached with a pistol. He cocked it, then aimed it at my head. "Silver bullets, mate. Made 'em myself." The cold steel of the barrel was pressed up against my forehead, digging into my skin. "Any last words, Lycan?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a whimper. I wasn't ready to die. There was so much more I wanted to do in life. All of my dreams and plans for the future. All of my brightest memories and the faces of my loved ones flashed before my eyes. And I waited for the bullet that would end my life. Guess not. I felt the man tense up as he was about to pull the trigger. And then something broke. A loud crack erupted from nearby. Chains rattled and shook. Steel snapped, and then there was screaming from all around. I opened my eyes to look around and saw a bloodbath. The men who had been surrounding me were being slaughtered by a gray streak that moved faster than anything I'd seen before. It was a blur of movement, stopping for a second to disembowel a hunter, then swiftly moving on to the next. Blood erupted into the air to my left and then my right. A fountain, a geyser, as men's throats were ripped out and their arms detached, and they tried to fight back ineffectually. It was like watching ants try to fight against a man. They stood no chance. The man who had been ready to shoot me was the last one left alive. He held his gun with both hands, trying to keep it steady in his trembling hands. Each time the creature paused, he tensed up and got ready to fire. But an instant later, it was moving again. A blur streaking through the air, reappearing somewhere else before he could get a shot off. I realized the creature was toying with him, as the beast grinned, showing its many long, sharp teeth. When he finally did manage to shoot at the beast, each bullet missed wild. He backed away, stumbling and falling over a tree trunk. The man crab-walked backwards, trying to find the gun he had dropped among the fallen leaves. The giant wolf creature came toward him, growling low and deep.
"Stay back!"
the man shouted, finding his gun.
"I'll shoot you! Get back! Get the fuck back!"
He pulled the trigger again. It fired once, then made several dry clicking noises as he continued to squeeze the trigger, the revolver empty. The creature lunged at him. The man's screams were loud and awful, and I turned my head away so I wouldn't be forced to watch. Eventually, he was quiet and could no longer make a noise. For a few minutes, all I could hear was the wet sounds of blood being spilled and teeth working to chew through muscle and bone. When I opened my eyes and looked up, there was the face of a large wolf in front of me, staring right at me. I couldn't help but notice those teeth, long and white, coming to points that could crush a skull with ease. For a moment, I thought I would die, that this form of my father would not recognize me. Its giant bloody maw came down towards me and I cringed backwards, the smell of coppery entrails wafting out from its gullet. But instead of teeth snapping shut on my face, a soft, oversized tongue licked my cheek, and then the warmth of an enormous dog settled down on the forest floor beside me. His breathing was too heavy, too fast, I realized, as I felt the warmth of blood soaking through my shirt. The hunter's last bullet had gotten him. I saw the wound as I sat up to look beside me. His eyes were wide and locked with mine, his mouth open and panting. No. I stroked the soft fur of his cheeks and pressed my face against his. I kissed his forehead and watched as he closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, then stopped. After a long while, I stood up to find a bloodbath all around me. Dead hunters whose families and friends would soon be looking for them. I threw their phones into the blazing fire, hoping the pictures they had taken of my father would not be uploaded to the cloud. I looked down to see the journal had been burnt to embers in the fire. The hunter had dropped it into the blaze before he was torn to shreds. One last insult. One last attack. With the journal gone, I had nothing left to show me the way. I walked back home to get a shovel and began to dig. It took a long, long time to make a pit big enough to bury all those bodies. When I was done, I felt exhausted, but I knew there was still more to do. I took my dad's belt and fixed it around my waist, sending it through the loops of my pants and then looking down at the silver wolf head on the buckle. As I reached down to pick up my father's lifeless corpse, now human again, I found I had more strength than ever before. His body weighed almost nothing. I knew how to get home. And I carried my father back to see the crying eyes of my mother waiting at the door, as if she had known all along. It's been almost a month since all this happened. My dad's funeral was a couple weeks back, and it surprised me again how little of my family is left still alive. No men were there to see him off. Only the women of the family remain. They complimented me on how well I was handling everything, how mature I'd become. They said how good I look wearing my father's old belt. That ancient family heirloom that nobody wants. As if it's cursed. I have no one to help me now. No one to guide me. But I've been preparing for the next full moon. I found a sturdy tree, bigger than the last, deeper in the wilderness of the forest, and I fixed it with manacles and thick steel chains. I'm watching the calendar, ready for the next full moon. I'm terrified, but after reading my father's journal, I refuse to make the same mistake he did. I may be a monster now, but I will not allow myself to turn into a cold-blooded killer. Unless I chance upon another dogman hunter, wandering alone in the forest. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Sewall, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Larry N50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Bajani Aspinall, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Carrie Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Wendy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gem Star, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, Clovis Wolf, Eldridge Elm, Derek Prey, Elder Being, KC Hawaii, Rob T, Tragic Mermaid, Darren Fishnaller, Cloves Zanoya Harris, Roe Underwood, Florida Man Luke, Bethany's Mom, Winter's Kiss, Sam Brook, The White Stag, Corgi Connection, No Name, and Martakara. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content, as well as a Discord channel. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. It really does help out a lot. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.